The violent, genocidal, and catastrophic transatlantic slave trade and colonialism are the historical twin towers that plugged the humanity of Africans into the dark night, which to this day seem to have no end in sight. The image of the African as a black and subhuman was forged through massive and violent enslavement of millions of African people sold in the Americas as properties of white colonial settlers. In the coastal and mainland villages of West Africa, through the gun, the dogs, and the spears, African communities were plundered, captured against their will, and chained like animals. At the ports of Ghana, those chained, naked, and malnourished bodies of men, women, and children were scaled, measured, and sold for gold, silver, or livestock. They were put in those gigantic ships that crossed thousands of kilometers of the massive body of violent and cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Millions will not survive the dangerous voyages on sea. They will die of disease, starvation, or pure mental illness. Many will be offloaded alive, thrown into the deep waters to ease navigation during the storms of the violent seas. It is on those cold Atlantic Ocean's waters, deep in the bottom of the ocean, that many carcasses of African people, their bones lay rotten in chains and swallowed by the sea. Those who survived and on arrival in the Americas were forced to work in the different plantations of white men. From the voyage ships to the plantation, the image of an inferior African was being constructed through brutal force. Then began the violent colonial conquest for settlement aimed at our natural resources that defined our native continent. The white man sought to rule Africa and here designed a system of racial segregation, racial humiliation, racial abuse that lasted for many centuries. The colony and the plantation, with the voyage slave ships in the middle, were the perfect technologies of recreating the African into a subservient being whose only survival in the modern world must always be through white tutelage, supervision, and approval. The transatlantic slave trade, colonial conquest, and colonial rule are responsible for the zombification of the African soul and its intellectual damnification and the psychotic condition where Africa and its people cannot handle their affairs without white supervision. As both an intellectual project and a program of revolutionary change, Pan-Africanism is first the recognition of this terrible history, which by all definition remains a world history that has cast the African into a global identity of inferiority amongst people of the world. Pan-Africanism is never forgotten noise of the painful cries of those captured slaves whose black bodies were swallowed by the Atlantic Ocean from the slave ships. It is the agonizing cry from the brutal violence suffered by the black slaves in the sugar, cotton, and corn plantations from Georgia to Sao Paulo. Pan-Africanism is also the resounding victory from the theater of the Haitian Revolution from 1781 to 1804, led by the greatest descendant of our continent, Toussaint Louverture. Together with his patrons, they bravely led the first and only successful slave revolution in human history, defeating a combined European force commanded by a France Napoleon Bonaparte. It is the bravery of those African former slaves who will define citizenship on a racial definition of blackness, declaring that Haiti belongs to black people regardless of the color of their skin. Pan-Africanism is also the anger emanating from the countless defeats suffered by the patrons, the brave soldiers like those of Mau Mau and Bambata rebellion, defeated at the hands of the brutal British colonial forces. It is the intellectual heritage of Marcus Garvey, W.E. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Harriet Tubman, Pixley Isaac Aseme, Charlotte Mateke, Winnie Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Seiko Tore, Julius Nyerere, Haile Selassie, CLR.A. James, Frantz Fanon, Thomas Sankara, and today our own Prof. Lumumba, together with us, must carry the mantle of the African Pan-Africanist call. Pan-Africanism is a set of ideas written in chains with blood, spear, and the unforgiving guns of the sons and daughters from the Algerian Revolution to the Battle of Kutoko-Naval. It is the one-party state of Africa as a whole, as professed by Marcus Garvey. It is Ami Caesarius' negritude, Kwame Nkrumah's African socialism, Steve Biko's black consciousness, Julius Nyerere Ujamaa. It is also Mbeki's African Renaissance, all based on forging a unity of African people who are formed by the same history and must seek after common destiny. It is the architectural achievement from the Pyramid of Egypt to the cities of Mapungubwe. It is the industrial invasion by Garrett Morgan, traffic lights, Frederick Jones, refrigerated trucks, and Alexandra Miles, automatic elevator doors. It is the cultural movement in jazz, R&B, reggae, funk, blues, kwaito, juju Nigeria, Chimorenga Zimbabwe, Makosa Cameroon, and Benga Kenya. It is the novel Things Fall Apart, The Devil on the Cross, Maru, The Trails of Brother Jeru, Songs of Solomon, and Notes of Native Son. It is the artwork of Gerald Sekoto, Chike Anyako, Oche Okeke, Edmonia Lewis, the religious movement of Bishop Lekhanyane, Manku, and Shembe, the Coptics of Egypt and the Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, as well as Islamic denominations from Tunisia, Nigeria, Kenya, all deserve a place in the rich thinking and knowledge about Africa and its people. It is true that Pan-African call has also been prophetic, carrying important cautions that those who conducted the project for the rebirth of the African continent in the post-colonial context have not heeded to. In the pages of Frantz Fanon, Ratchet of the Earth, lays a critique which, since independent in the 1950s to this day, leaders of African people have failed to give programmatic response to this call. First and foremost, the Pan-African call is a call for African unity, not cooperation, collaboration, or coexistence. Many of you confuse the unity of Africa to mean collaboration or cooperation. We don't want to cooperate, we don't want to collaborate, we want to be one, and being one means we must share the same vision and the same direction.